We are. Got it.
All right.
And all right. Good morning, Bob Tassone. How are you today, sir, on this
Oh,
July
I'm doing
5th?
just great, but I'm getting better.
Doing great, but getting better. I like to hear that. That's a good way to start off the middle of a week here as we come off of this hot holiday here at the beginning of July. And we got a little bit of a short week this week, but we're continuing a subject matter of discussion that we started a couple weeks ago. And we brought a couple of subjects up here as you're covering into insurance policies and how homeowners can best protect their assets and make sure that they are getting the best coverages that they need. And we started talking about flood insurance a little bit, probably a couple weeks ago. We got a little bit more detail with it last week or 2 weeks ago, I guess. And now you've got a little bit more information that you want to share. So I'd love to have you talk a little bit more about what you can tell us about flood insurance.
Well, the process usually, John, and of course we have experience with this because we've worked in places where there are a lot of low-lying areas like Matthews, Deltaville, Pocosin, York County. And in situations like that, sometimes I'll get a phone call and somebody will ask me, well, they tell me that I need flood insurance. How much? They give me the address. And I say, how much is it going to cost? I say, well, I can only give you an estimate, and I'll say between $500 and $5,000.
It's a pretty big window.
And that's just actually it could be more than that. I doubt it would be less than that, but it really depends on a lot of things. And so I'll say, well, do you have an elevation certificate? And they say, well, what's that? Or I think there's one, but we haven't got it yet, or something like that. I mean, this is an elevation certificate form,
Okay.
and the things that go on this form determine the rate for flood insurance.
Well, before you get into that, where would you get that? And who would have it?
Oh,
How would you find it?
this is from the FEMA and the National Flood Insurance Program.
Okay.
And actually, the National Flood Insurance Program is a government subsidized program for people that build houses on floodplains. I mean, the reason that we have more flood claims now and more need for flood insurance is because people like to have waterfront property.
Of course.
But sometimes they build their houses where they're too close to the waterfront or they're too low or whatever, and the water rises for whatever reason. We covered that last time. So now the question is, well, if I'm going to have a house close to the water and the bank says I need flood insurance, what should I do? Well, first of all, if you're getting a survey done, ask the surveyor to complete a flood elevation certificate, because while he's surveying, he can do that for you. And once you have it done, it's good for a long time.
So I've run into a situation where we had a home here in Williamsburg, and it happened to be in Ford's Colony, and this is a couple of years ago, and it actually was not disclosed initially when we were written a contract on the property that it was in a flood area, and it was not in what we would assumed was a flood prone area because it was not a waterfront property. However, as it so occurred, there was a stream on the back end of the property, off of this property, but in a easement area, and lo and behold, the home, the better part of the home was identified as being in a flood area, and we had to go through the process of having a survey so that the surveyor could establish an elevation and bring in an elevation certificate. So I'm sorry, I just wanted to kind of throw that in there. It can happen that something that we wouldn't have known can come up when you're either buying a house or building a house, and it's not uncommon.
It's best to get the elevation certificate. I mean, sometimes we can rate without one. But I think usually the rate is going to be higher if you rate without the certificate. So it's better to get a certificate. And so the things that go into the rate, when you look at an elevation certificate, I mean, this is like 4 or 5 pages of information that is filled in here. And so, I mean, they go into what the flood zone is, and we'll talk about that another day. That's determined by FEMA. The square footage of the dwelling and the square footage of the crawl space or the basement of the dwelling. And so in rural areas where you have a basement, a lot of times you hear about people say, well, my basement floods. You know, sometimes there's a stream that's running through your basement.
Right. And water moves
Yeah,
underground.
yeah. We don't have that as much around here because we have a lot more crawl spaces around here. But anyway, how big is the crawl space? And then the key thing is not the elevation of the land, but what is the elevation of the first floor? Because crawl spaces can be engineered so that the water will flow through them without damaging anything.
Yeah.
And so, but how high is the first floor? Because that's where the valuable stuff is. Most people don't keep anything valuable in the crawl space. And if you have an HVAC system and you're on a property that's subject to flooding, then you see sometimes the HVAC unit is elevated.
Yep.
Built on some type of a pedestal. And that's to protect it in case there's water flowing through. And so how high is the first floor? And then do you have any openings in your crawl space? Openings are good because if there is water, we want it to flow through. We don't want it to run into the dwelling and then find a barrier where it feels like it needs to lift or move the dwelling.
Yeah.
So if you ride around Pocosin or some areas of Yorktown and you look at the foundations, sometimes you'll see there are vents that are bigger than your standard little vent that you have in your crawl space. They're much bigger and they're louvered. And the reason for those is they're designed to let water flow through the foundation. Actually, it's a good thing to have those set up. I had a property down in Deltaville, right down in Stingray Point that I was insuring. I mean, right down there on the bay. And it was on stilts.
Yeah.
Stilts, you can say, well, that's kind of scary having a house on stilts, but stilts if your house is on stilts, it can be okay. You can have a fairly low flood insurance premium because you're lifting up that first floor.
Getting in the house itself, bringing it up out of the flood zone, even though the property is in the flood zone, right? So
Okay, so I've got one house that's on stilts, and you can look right underneath the house. You can look right through it. I have another house, well, they put it on stilts, but they decided they wanted to turn that lower area into a garage. So they built walls around it. So they can park their car or the golf cart or whatever they want, their lawnmower down underneath. Well, now, how did they engineer the walls to this? Because the house is on stilts, are the walls breakaway?
Breakaway walls, right?
Because if they're designed to break away, then that's good. But if they're not designed to break away, then what'll happen once again is that water will hit that wall and it doesn't have anywhere to go, and it pushes that house. The water pushes it. And that's where you see the house floating down the bay.
Water has a very tremendous amount of force behind it, especially in large quantities and large volumes, but it's amazing how much force is contained in water over time. And I think that that's something that always has to kind of be taken into consideration. Flood insurance is not meant to just be a penalty for owning a home. It's there to help protect you, protect your investment, protect the bank's investment in the event that there is an event. And we're in a location here in the greater Williamsburg area here in the peninsula. We haven't had a major storm event in a few
20
years.
years.
And it could be a little while before, who knows when another one will come, but that's the question. Who knows when? It's not a question of if, it is a question of when, and it's much better to be prepared and be protected and to know what you've got for coverages. So do you ever find a situation, Bob, where during the course of insuring a property, the rules have changed? Because the rules change, or the designations for flood areas can change.
Yeah, well, they can change the zones for where you are, and usually they don't change them in your favor because they're trying to get more and more premium. But that leads me to the next point that I want to make with flood insurance. So the National Flood Insurance Program is a government-backed program, but there are also things called private flood insurance policies.
Okay.
In some areas, they're underwritten. So a company called like Neptune Flood is one of them. They'll take the elevation certificate and they'll look at it and they might say, we want this or we don't want it. But if they want it, usually the premium will be less. And sometimes I can cut the premium in half or cut it by a third or something from what the NFIP premium would be.
Good deal. Okay.
So that's something to ask about or to think about. Now, if there's a hurricane spinning, off of Florida, that's not a good time to call me about flood insurance.
Now is better than never.
because what they'll do, they'll just say, well, we're not writing anything right now.
Right. They're gonna you're gonna
and the NFIP has a 30-day wait.
Okay. So sooner rather than later.
So if the hurricane's coming up the coast, that's not the time to call me to say, well, I've been thinking about getting a flood insurance policy. A lot of times I can't do anything at that point.
Okay.
You've got to think about it now when everything is nice and dry and there's nothing happening.
I think that is a good point to make. Good point to make. So, Bob, if you have any resources on, I actually have on my website an area where I have a location for the FEMA maps. So going into johnpolson.com and I can't really show it here because I can't share my screen, but well, I can actually. But having not done that, maybe next time we'll go in there and I can kind of show where these resources would be and how folks can kind of research where they are in find themselves on a FEMA map and so forth. But there's a lot of good information about flood insurance. We're not here to scare anybody to make you feel like you're in danger or risk, but I think that owning a home is, of course, that it's a very important investment. It's very important to make sure that you're protecting yourself and protecting that asset as effectively as you can. And life is not without risk. And in fact, because there is risk involved in anything we do, we're subjected to those risks. And that's why Bob is here with Port Insurance and Port Financial Services here in Williamsburg. You cover the peninsula, and I'm here, Bob, to help bring people to you for services to help protect their real estate investments and protect their own financial future where that ownership of real estate is concerned. So I appreciate you bringing more information here about insurance and flood insurance. We'll be back again on another Wednesday coming up. And in the meantime, if you have any questions about insurance or flood insurance, Bob's contact information is here on the page. And I'm John Polson with the Memory Group Real Estate here in Williamsburg, and glad to help you make smart decisions and avoid costly mistakes where real estate ownership is concerned. So, Bob, with that, appreciate your bringing this information. I know there's a lot more that we can talk about. We'll bring more and we'll talk about it more again on another day. We'll let everybody have their day back and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, John. It's always good to talk to you.
All right, great. Bye.
Take care.